My name is Andrew Eriks. I lived once in a city called New York. My mother is Terry Eriks. She's in the phone book. If you know the city, and if you find this, find her. Don't show her this, but tell her I love her, that I'm trying to come home. Please. It all started back when I decided around the time that when I turned 25, that it was time for me to give up talking or taking my backpack into work. It would make me a lot more mature. I thought that if I wasn't lugging around a book bag everywhere, like in a high school student, of course this would meant I had to give up on reading in a subway in the mornings and afternoons. Since I couldn't quite fit paperbacks in the pocket, a briefcase would have been out of the line. Since I was working in a factory, and messenger bags always seemed a little, fruity to me. Too purse-like for my liking. I had an MP3 player, to which it helped pass the time for a while. But when it broke, it would start to shut down at the end of every song if I didn't skip to the next track manually. I gave that one up too. Every Sunday morning I'd sit in the metro station for a half an hour that dragged on me endlessly, with nothing at all to do but watch my fellow passengers. I was slightly shy, so I didn't like to be caught at it, but I sure abraciously watched people. Interestingly enough, I quickly discovered that I wasn't the only person in the world who was uncomfortable in public. People covered it up in various ways, but I learned to see them through. I divided them up into categories in my head. There were fidgeters, who couldn't get comfortable, constantly moving their hands, shifting their weight, moving their legs closer to the bench, and then further. They were the most noticeably nervous types. After them, there were fake sleepers, who would take their seat and practically close their eyes in the same second. Most of them weren't really sleeping though. The real sleepers shifted more, came awake suddenly at stops or after loud noises. The fakes just zoned in from the second that they wait until the movement of the train pulled to their stop. Then there were the MP3 player addicts, the occasional laptop people, the people that traveled in groups and also talked too loudly. The cell phone junkies were either way popular or completely unable to shut up for more than 2 minutes at a time. Just as people watching was threatening to get unbearably boring, I found my twist incredibly. A middle-aged looking man, brown hair, average size and weight, and dressed casually. Oddly enough, he seemed like almost too normal. He had no remarkable features, no mannerisms, as if he was designed to fade into a crowd, to which it led me to notice him. I was intentionally trying to see how people acted in the subway, and he didn't act at all. He didn't even react, either. It was like seeing someone sitting in front of the television, watching a documentary about fish. They weren't really excited or engaged, but they weren't looking away either. Present, but not accounted for. He was on the subway in the afternoons. It was more than a month into the people watching the experiment before he caught my eye. Because I didn't catch the same subway every day, and didn't consciously sit in the same car when I did. I saw him for the first time on a Monday, I believe, and the second time on the Thursday in the same week. He obviously did catch the same train and sat in the same car at the exact same seat. Even OCD much? I thought at the time, since he caught my attention so often at the same time. I watched him more vividly next, as he was, frankly, downright unsettling. He didn't do anything at all. He just sat there expressionless, head straight, no matter what happened. A woman with a willing child entered the car and sat right beside him, and did nothing. He didn't even do so much as turn his head or frown in annoyance. And that kid was so fucking loud too. By the time the subway reached my stop, I found myself queasy when I exited out of the car. My hands were shaking like I was in a nicotine fit. Something about this man was wrong. He was, I thought, some kind of a freak. A sociopath, maybe? One of those quiet guys who turns out has dozens of women heads in his freezer. The first victim is his mother. I found myself unintentionally dawdling after work in the afternoons, stopping to browse in the kiosks in the mall near the subway, even I didn't intend to buy anything. For a couple of weeks, I avoided catching that subway, and when I found myself at the stop when it was pulling in, I made sure to choose a train car as far from the one I've seen with him in as possible. Then one morning, I saw another person who set off the same warning bells in my head. A woman, just plain looking, just as out of place in the hustle and the commotion around her. The moment I recognized her, I realized later, was when my obsession began. My people watching, which had begun as a bit of a hobby to stave off of boredom, became something of a religion to me. I couldn't enter a subway or ride a bus without finding myself examining everyone, filling out a mental checklist in my head. Plain clothes, solid colors, no brands, check. No expressions, no casual glances out the windows or towards other passengers, check. No bags, purses, or accessories, check, 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 check. We've got another. I started calling them the strangers. I didn't see them every day, and even after I started taking the metro more than I needed to, even when I found myself riding buses out of my way in the evenings. But they were often enough. Seeing one would each set my teeth on edge. I make my palms sweaty and my throat feel dry. If you ever given a speech, you might recognize that feeling. Even though they didn't pay me even the slightest attention, I felt that I was on display for them. I could see them, plain as day. How could they miss me? They didn't, though, not in any way that I could tell. And when eventually my curiosity overpowered my fear, I decided to follow one. I chose the one that I found first, the man in the afternoon subway who always kept the same seat. I got on and took the seat beside him. We rode to the end of the line, and then he rose and walked out before I did. Keeping the distance between us, I tailed him, but he didn't go far. He took a seat nearby bench, and his expressions as always. I turned to the corner and waited, trying to look nonchalant. After a few moments, the metro arrived, and I watched him enter, and I saw him take the same seat, and I couldn't find the nerve to follow him again. He hadn't gone anywhere. He just rode out of the metro to the end of the line, and then what? Rode it back? What a possible reason would he? Would anyone have did that for? It nagged at me long after I rode a ladder train back home and tried to get some rest. I couldn't leave it alone. Not until I could make some sense of it. I found myself more confused, and I was downright angry now. Why was this uncanny bastard, this almost inhuman person, riding the subway trains back and forth, going nowhere? The mind at once read the recoils of certain things, because the slightest of them is an affront. Spiders lit out in a lot of people, and practically big ones. They just look at the wrong alien. That was the effect of the strangers that were beginning to have on me. They offended my senses. I followed him again the next day, and again the day after that. Every day for at least a week, the two of us made our silent trips together. I thought I only knew it, but by the end of the week, I was following him for hours, until the last train that stopped near my apartment blocked that night. We rode from one end of the city to another, and then back again. I wasn't people watching any longer. I was person watching, stranger watching. I didn't have any eyes for anyone else, although I did notice more than a few confused glances that sent my way. Other than that, we two might have been the only people on the planet for all I cared. I lost my job the next week. My manager was kind and timid but firm. I wasn't concentrating. I had no focus. Wasn't being anywhere near productive. It was actually quite a speech, I think, but I could barely hear it. All I could think about was my new work, my vigil, and what could that man, no, that thing, on the subway, get up there where I wasn't to keep an eye on him? I left for work for the last time at the noon that day. Normally I've started tailing my subject at 5:30, but I was sure that he'd be waiting for me. I wish now that I had paid more attention to the day. Was it sunny? It was summer after all. I could have walked downtown, maybe checked out a few pretty girls, could have been a nice cappuccino and a smoke and even an outdoor cafe and then got home. I put my growing obsession over my head, found a new job, and has been taken reading on trains and buses again. Instead, I waited. More than one train goes up and down the lines, so I sat in the station for at least an hour until I saw him through a window. I walked into the subway car, and I noticed that the first time my skin wasn't clammy. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't as pounding as hard. I sat for the first time, right across from him, directly in his line of sight, watched for the change in his face. He would recognize me. If he did so, I saw no sign of it, and I was looking hard. We must have made quite a pair, sitting across from one another and almost that afternoon, staring into one another. It was hard not to left the building in the rage at me and my contorted face, but with the effort, I was able to keep still, as expressionless as him. Inside, I practically screamed at him, "React to me, you fucking asshole! See me, damn it! I know you for what you are!" I didn't go through in my head, and silent demands weren't answered. Not the first trip around, or the second, or the third or 10th. We rode far into the night together, and at each other for terminus, we got out together and waited, and I sat right beside him on the bench, watching him from the corner of my eye, and still got nothing from him, but two could play that game one as well. Finally, we made our last trip together. I had him, and I knew it. The last trip of the night, before the train stopped running. I always let him get away from me at that point, because at the end of the line is a long way from home, and the buses stop running at the same time as the subways. But this time, I'd follow him, finally see what happens when the trains stopped running. I'd get some answers, maybe. The subway rolled on, and the anticipation grew in me. The car emptied out as slowly until it was just who were the two watchers below the city. I fought to keep the manic grin at bay, and the subway train slowed to a crawl, then stopped at the end of the line. The stranger did not move, still didn't react at all. The car stood still, doors open. I could only dimly hear the last bit of stragglers making their way out of the station somewhere behind us, footsteps echoing in the silence. Nothing. The speaker systems dinged to let anyone half asleep know that we reached the terminus. Still nothing. And finally I could hear footsteps again. A conductor or something, popping his head out of the car to make sure it was empty before taking the train wherever the hell it goes for the night. I didn't take my eyes off from the silent quarry. I managed to see the conductor from the corner of my eye, and when he finally reached our car, he looked in. His eyes roamed over us, and a puzzled look came over his face. He blinked a few times and paused. I waited for him to speak, and the moment stretched out, but then with a slight shake of the head, he left us, and there was a car ahead of us and of ours. And I heard him stop to check that too. And then a few minutes later, the train started up again. We rode for a time and then looped around. The subway was parked. I could see into the windows of more trains the other side of us, and through the opposing windows into more. And then he smiled at me. It was just a curl of the lip, and that would have gone unnoticed if I had spent several hours studying his face. "So," he said in a rough baritone tone, "here we are." I tried to respond, but I couldn't get it right away. My throat had clamped shut. Terror had filled me. It felt like the whole underground cavern we're in just collapsed onto me. I coughed and stammered, and finally managed with a raspy voice to ask a question that kept me up at night, drove me halfway to madness. It led me to this place, and this moment. "What are you?" He ignored me. He stood, and the train doors opened. Then, shockingly, he turned to face me. "Comin'?" He didn't want to wait for an answer, but walked out of the platform. I scrambled to follow. "Come on, damn it!" I shouted. "Talk to me. Who are you? What? Why do you ride this metro all fucking day?" He didn't even look back or slow his step. I could see his face, but it was safe to guess that he didn't react at all, no more than he had to anything else. I stalked after him, still shouting for a time, but eventually gave up. 5 more words and all I was gonna get out of him, I guessed. He walked along the platform until we came to a junction, then turned. Now we're in the perpendicular to trains around us. The path ahead was lit from above but I could see where it ended. The trains on either side went for us forever, and as far as I could tell, too many trains service on the city. I realized it could have mattered by then. I figured, but I probably should have paid more attention to that time. I'm not sure how long we walked. I did have to watch one, but it broke. I took out my cell phone at one point, but got no reception down there, and it would show me that there was no signal. The stranger would stop every now and then and look at the subway car for a minute or two, but then he would pass on. It took me a while to figure out why, but eventually I saw that they weren't all the same. Long lines of them would be similar, and then we would come to a different model. It'd be a bit larger or smaller, or have slightly different shape. Then we'd come to the cockpits or whatever to be the front or part of the conductor sits were superficially different as well. I didn't, and I don't know what he was looking for. But eventually he must have found it, because we turned again, and the subway doors opened, and my improv guide stopped right in front of them when we entered, and we took our seats. "Are you willing to speak now?" I asked him. No answer. I sighed with frustration, and seriously weighed onto the pros and cons of punching him right in the face for the time, when suddenly the lights on the car came on, and I heard the engine starting up. What the fuck? He then gave me a look and almost said, "You're not going to be able to go back." "What are you talking about? Go back where?" "Nothing again. The stonewalling asshole. The train just lurched into motion, pushing off in the opposite direction than the one we came from, I think. The endless parade of them had been thrown off in the sense of direction. It rolled my eyes a few times, and then began to slow as we approached a stop. His vacant gaze grew sharper, and for the first time, I got the sense that he was actually staring at me, rather than just looking in the direction I happened to be in. "Be still, be silent, don't catch their attention." The train stopped, doors opened, and then they began to flood in. I don't even know what I noticed at first. The weird clothes, the long arms with hands, almost brushed to the floor, the jet black eyes, and the angular faces, or the blue-gray hue of their skin. My eyes then took in almost stimuli, but for the long second, my brain refused to process it. And when it finally did, I was barely able to bite down the shriek that I had tried to tear its way from my throat. I thought my heart was going to explode. Hell, I thought I was going to explode. I was like strummed a guitar string. Everything around me lurched and throbbed. My sight grew dizzy, to which I was thankful for. I vomited. My mouth was clenched shut, and I forced myself to swallow it. Barely managing it, my instincts were screaming at those words at me. "Be still, be silent, don't catch their attention." That day was a blur. We rode the subway car up and down the line, and still expressionless, for hours, for days perhaps. It seemed like much longer than the line I knew, and the line I knew I followed the stranger all along. The hideous things around us seemed to pay no undue attention, although we thought we must have stood out fiercely. And I was petrified with fear that when we finally returned to the endless cavern of trains alone, I burst into tears. I collapsed onto the floor and just sobbed for a long time, the stranger watching impassively. I gained control of myself, and I looked at him importantly. "Take me home," I croaked out. "Please." "I can't," he told me. "Don't know which one of these would lead you back. If any of them do." He then stood and walked to the platform, and I rose wearily and followed him. He spun around sharply. "I think you followed me enough, though." The rage I felt in him before, the panic had temporarily buried me and rose up. "What?" I screamed, rushing forward and grabbing him by the shoulders into the burst of insane strength. "I didn't even know what was me in there." I slammed up against the side of the Metro card. "You son of a bitch! What the hell do you even think did to me?" I slammed him again and again. "Take me back!" He bore it all passively, and soon the flare of anger in me gutted out, leaving hollow. "Please," I begged, "take me home." "That's not how it works," he said. "If we stay together, it's more likely we will be noticed. Go to your own way, be subtle, and they'll think that you're one of theirs." "How could you do this to me? Why?" He gave me another almost sad look. I had to. You will too. You'll get stuck sometimes. He brushed my hands off his shoulders and then turned to walk away. I fell to my knees, suddenly out of strength, and watched him leave at the junction. He turned my face back to me. I'm sorry. And then he was gone. I laid on the cold tiles for a long time. I curled up into a ball and wept for a while. After there weren't any tears left in me, I managed to get some sleep. When I woke up at the subway train, I'd come in and gone, carrying off to more blue-gray abominations, or to whatever blue-gray abominations go. I couldn't handle going back there anyways. I tried to find my way back from where I started, to find a subway I recognized, but I wasn't even sure which direction I should be going anymore. I walked for an hour, and then finally, I found that one that might have looked familiar, or I was desperate enough to imagine what I did. When I first stepped up the door, it opened for me, and then took a seat. It started up, in spite of a long life agnostic. I prayed my heart out. This train slowly came to a stop. The doors opened, and for a second I thought, saved. Human beings, I'd be devoted to the man of the world. Then I got noticed in the eyes, especially the third large eye in the center of their foreheads. Well, fuck you then, God, I thought. They were easier to take in than the last bunch, though, and I was thankful for that. The third eye blinked independently than the other two. I thought that was nauseating, and then most of them smiled, or laughed, or spoke with another. I couldn't help but notice that what was on their teeth were sharp and mishappened, and the yellow-green filth, but I was careful and selectively blind. I could pretend to stretch until I was home, until one of them entered with a sandwich in hand. I realized with the start that I was starving and hadn't eaten or drank for what must have been days. The next terminus I came into, I tried to find something to eat or drink. I don't know why I waited, but it seemed important to ride to the end of the line. I got there. I could barely bring myself to leave. The stranger would leave the underground. I never seen him eat or drink either. My stomach would not take no for an answer, though. I steeled myself and tried to keep my face carefully neutral, and made my way out of the station proper, and then got confused. I was looking for the escalators or stairs, or something like that, but all I saw was holes on the ground, and the walls and the ceiling gasping, irregularly sized holes. I was like in the middle of the beehive. What was I supposed to do? Leap into one? It didn't make any sense to me, not until someone came through one. He floated up in the air and then floated by me. He frowned for a second, or at least I thought he was, probably a frown, but apparently whatever kept him from recognizing me as an alien in the subway extended at least this far. It did not, unfortunately, allow me to levitate, which it seemed to be the only way out of the subway station beehive thing. Swearing, I made my way back down to the tunnel. I was angry, lost, and starving, and had been abandoned to a fate. If it wasn't worse than hell, it was at least twice as stupid as 3 times as nonsensical. I was not in the best frame of mind, which I feel excuses for the mistake. Normally I took corners with a wide berth, and everyone knows that if you just dart around the corner sharply in a public place, chances are decent that you're going to walk into someone, as I did. I slammed into someone. A woman fell onto the ground without thinking. I reacted badly like any New Yorker would. Badly. Jesus, you are so stupid, bitch. Watch where you're going. I realized the mistake before she did. Her eyes then grew a quizzical look and confused. Then she really noticed me. They bulged in horror and she leapt, or floated quickly, back of me and let out something like a scream more like lowly than I was used to. But it got to the point further down the tunnel. I saw an alien, those 3-eyed heads, turning towards us. I thought suddenly about all those sharp, filthy teeth, and just like that I was running. The subway train wasn't even there, but then there was a walkway along with the tunnel for the repairman, I assume. That's weird, like who would use this from? Anyways, I took it at a full speed and just kept running until, the breath felt like getting stabbed. I stopped panting and looked back. The tunnel had curved, so I couldn't see any light any longer. but nobody appeared to be following me. Going back, though, was not an option. I continued forward in the dark for a long time. Eventually, I came to a small opening in the wall and then stopped there for a rest. Hunger, despair, and full speed, terrified I'd run had left me absolutely drained. I probably would have wept again, to which it seemed to be capable of as of lately. But it just seemed like too much work. I sat against a wall, legs splayed out, and imagined that I was beating the bastard stranger to death with a hammer. It was a relieving image. A rat was shuffling around nearby in the dark. Every so often I would kick out a foot to scare it away. But after a while, I didn't even bother with that. Rabies or any other diseases I might be carrying would be blessing compared to the endless traveling through the subways of strange worlds, lost, destitute, and alone. When it crept near me again, I didn't shoot off, and even when I had reached and pressed against my leg, I couldn't bring myself to care, not until a train passed by, and the lights of its cars lit up the curve light as I was in. And that thing, I thought it was a rat. It was a rat-like, yes, but not as much as a spider-like. If someone had been bred to two of them together, resulting in an abomination, might have been almost as horrible as that thing nuzzling my leg. I shrieked, flung myself up from the floor, and then did pretty much like a soccer ball player would, and right into the opposite wall. Its back made a sickening crunch, and I watched it twitch out its last breath before the final car passed and the darkness returned. And as in the darkness, a terrible thought came to me. I wondered if I was edible. I didn't want to, and gagged just imagining it, but I was hungry. There was no guarantee that I'd be able to find food in this place or ever again. Rat spider was my only option. I held off as long as I could, but at the end, survival trumped my squeamishness, and I had my lighter, but nothing to light on fire. I picked the meat off its carcass and cooked a little bit by holding it over the flame, but it didn't help much. Nothing could have. Its meat was foul, and more foul than anything you can imagine. I've been so desperate for food since I've eaten many of my other questionable things, but nothing has ever been bad as the rat spider was. In retrospect, that was when I became a stranger. Before I struggled to each expression stayed over the other maintained. What I had taken for calm of numbness, a sharp rock thrown into a river. Well, over time, its edges rounded off by the water being over it. And what I'd been gone through, too, had done the same, tearing up and eating a monster in the dark. Below an alien world, the last of my edges smooth. By the time the darkness came, and then back into the tunnel, I was expressionless and empty, as the one who led me had never been. That was not the worst of it, though. The worst of it came later, and the first time I got stuck. The stranger had mentioned it, but I was in the state I was in. I had hardly noticed. One night at the end of the line, I was asked to leave the train. The world has no one of the closer to normal ones. The people there were almost human. As I recognized it, they were the orange sure and the hunchbacked, but none of that were practically normal. After the last world, the last people had been hideously overweight, six-breast metamorphoses with no noses. The orange guys were pretty much beautiful to me. I thought at first that the conductor was talking to someone else, but I was the only one in the car, and moreover, I understood him. The oranges were certainly who hadn't been speaking English all day, but nevertheless, I could understand what he was saying. Then I stood. I began to realize why. I couldn't stand up straight. I was hunchback, and then I saw my reflection against the window as I exited. Orange. I pieced together from there. Stuck meant that I was trapped in this world for some reason, and stuck losing them as well. To which it would be handy if I wanted to take the opportunity to leave the subway station, which is possible most times, but it requires a lot of care and it's quite overwhelming. Alien worlds are a little revolting. I found that if you try to compare them to your own, but the differences are so vast that it just makes you sick. I, on the other hand, however, left that subway anyways, because it was clear I wasn't returning to that central hub, what I had taken to call the infinite line of subway trains. That night or any other night, I soon found out. Whatever had let me go unnoticed wasn't working any longer. I considered briefly staying, but this place wasn't home, and it could never be. Even if they looked like me, their culture was bound to be different. That was a lesson I've learned before. Even the words where people are absolutely indistinguishable from me are fraught with danger. I was in once in the world where people looked like me. Well, actually, they looked Brazilian, but that was more than close enough. I learned the hard way that the gesture to me means hello, meant something gravely insulting. Insulting enough that I'd be beaten half to death with the little crowd looking at with approval. Besides, even if that place had a culture I could fake, I didn't want to stay. I wanted two things: to find my way home, or to find the stranger who sent me to his path and beat the shit out of him. Nothing else would do. So I wanted to move on. I wasn't sure, though, if I could do some poor sucker what had done to me. I could really force someone to wander the internal underground like me. It turns out I didn't have to. After a few months of them, they did notice me, yes, and they began to follow me for weeks. I very much carefully made it seem like I had seen him, just like the stranger had. But I was torn from between the desire to warn him away and the desire to bring him to the end of the line, so I could leave his dismissal world already. That last night he followed me to the end of the line, and just like I once did, he hadn't managed to work up the nerve to sit straight across from me, and so I thought as soon as the train stopped and the terminals rushed off, I waited, hoping that the conductor wouldn't see me and I could continue on, but to no avail. I left the car and the metro rushed off without me. I cursed inside, but as I walked around the corner towards the ticket booths, the young man who had been following me attacked. He had a wicked curved knife and would have caught me by surprise, but I'd be traveling through those hostile alien worlds for several years. My reflexes were sharp. We struggled viciously before I managed to wrestle the knife off of him. I don't know what got into his neck, and I don't even think of want to kill him, and I hadn't been that angry. Remembering my own building rage from so long before. Afterwards, he would stay and lay there, bled out. I got pissed and kicked him repeatedly, shouting, "You were supposed!" Kick, kick. "To follow me!" Kick. I fled the scene of the crime, but not for long, as I was there bright and early the next day to catch the first subway in the morning. And that night, when I rode it back at the end of the line, I was invisible to the conductor again. I guess you can say either kill them or bring them with you if you want to return to Central Hub. I was invisible again, but I was also orange and hunchback still. I stayed like that way until the next time I became stuck. The next time I killed, and the next one went much faster. I didn't have to wait for her to follow me. Once I was recognized as a stranger, I recognized her as the next one. I made my choice. I won't bring anyone else into this. It makes me wonder, though, about the stranger who inducted me. I wonder what he originally looked like, and whatever he knew he could have killed me. I wondered, too, about the others I saw back home, and the rare few I came across since I left. Do they kill them or take them? And whichever one they choose, do they consider it as mercy? I can't bring myself to talk to them. To ask, we're damned either way, and damned should be suffer in solitude. I would have killed 15 of them by now, and would have gotten very good at it. But I've made my decision. I'm done killing innocents, at least. Before I returned to the Central Hub, I filled a backpack with much paper as I could to cram into it, and wrote this story over and over again. Left this to be in many subway trains as I can. A couple thousand messages in bottles, cast into the sea of rails. This is a request and a warning. My request is above. You may find my mother and tell her a lie. It's a white lie. Don't worry. Tell my mother that I love her, and that I'm trying to come home. It may give her some hope, or at least a small measure of peace. I wish it were true. But the last thing, I've been thinking to myself like the Odyssey. Lost in adrift, looking for a return familiar shores. But I am a lost at sea. I am a lost in endless tunnels and the labyrinth. The difference is important, and the labyrinths are designed to build. Somebody or something made this impossible place, and they must be held accountable for what they have done to me. They cast me as the Venus, not Odious, and I wouldn't play in that part any longer either. Strange rules of this place have turned me away from them from the human, and turned me into something else, and then something yet again. They would have made me a monster. So I will be a minotaur as is Labyrinth, and if I can, I'll tear it down around me and destroy those who built it. My warning is that you should be very wary of public places, of silent, expressionless men and women. Keep your distance, they may kill you, or they may do worse. If you see them, run far and fast, and even more importantly, I warn you, I beg you, do not ride the train to the end of the line.